people like overdo it. And I mean,
There's still a person there. There's still a person there.
I loved you. You've made the most sense. Hallelujah.
Yeah, that is my experience, that until we're witnessed, we can't fully digest our experience. And that story is how we communicate the experience. So until our story is heard, we can't fully take it in ourselves. But then once we have, we don't have to hold on to it quite so rigidly. You know, we have stories, we're not our stories. Those are two different things. We have feelings, we're not our feelings, you know, ultimately. So it gives you a healthier relationship with your story by putting it in the context of another person. Another person has that. I think that their consciousness contains our experience in the time that we're telling them the story. And then when that happens, there's a process of transformation that happens. You know, we see ourselves mirrored back. Yeah. And that becomes a container for our story. And that's where the alchemy happens. That's where in the reflection, you know, of ourselves, in their wisdom and in the way that they take it in or don't.
First of all, thank you for sharing so many intense transitions. I was intrigued with the question of, you clearly went through a huge purgative period. When did you begin to feel you had traction with yourself?
When I came home and stayed. I spent 10 years basically on the road. I didn't have a permanent address. And I felt like I was looking for myself. I was looking for the truth out there. And finally, I met someone at an ashram one day. It was a guy who was about 70 years old. He said, "What are you doing here?" I said, "Oh, I'm sleeping I'm here for a couple of weeks. I'm just doing..." He said, "Let me tell you something." He said, "I've been on the road for 50 years. And you know what I've taken from all that?" I said, "What?" He said, "Nada." He's scared, really scared the life out of me. He said, "Go home and dig in one place." We were at the Meher Baba ashram, and that was one of Meher Baba's great sayings, is dig in one place. So when I went home and stayed there, and all of the phantoms I'd been running away from had nowhere to go but here, that's when I felt myself taking root as a man. I feel like until then I was a kid. I mean, I felt like a boy until then. And there was something about coming home and giving myself not the choice to run away, but to just be with my own terror, that I woke up. Something woke up in me. Not on the road, not at the next lecture, the next ashram, the next monastery. As great as all that is, I think there's a time when seeking becomes running. Yes. And I was running away.
You talk about having a friend to be a witness. I'm wondering if writing has been your witness or one of them.
It has. You know, writing's been my great consolation. It really did save my life when I was a kid. I started writing journals when I was 7, 8 years old. And it was the one place that I could tell the truth. And being able to put it down on paper and have it take on physical reality gave me hope. It gave me hope that it wasn't all for naught. You know, that it wasn't all just going to be wasted. That was my sense as a kid. If I didn't witness it and capture it and tell these stories, they would be somehow wasted. There was so much suffering, and I didn't want it to be invisible. So for me, it was a way of bringing suffering into light, and also feeling like I had a friend. Like you're saying, I felt like I had a companion. The page was my witness. What I'm looking for is someone who will hear me and hear my experience. And in that, we create a joined sense of communion, a kind of redemption happens in that sharing. But it's a human sharing. And the problem for me with a lot of non-dual teaching is it leaves out the immanent. It leaves out the relative. The relative is part of the game. And you can't just toss out the relative and leap into the absolute without losing a great deal of ground and grounded reality. So for me, the game is about seeing that through this. Without this, that wouldn't be that interesting. Its situation without meaning or without interpretation, without it becoming a story, is just journalism. It's just the facts. It's not the story. The story is what it means to you. And what I said was that situation plus meaning equals story. And that's what I go through with my students. I teach memoir, and they think that because amazing things happen to them that they have a story. they don't have a story. They have the raw material for a story, but they haven't connected the dots. They haven't found themselves in the story. And it's all about tracing your own direction through the story that gives it the frame that I was talking about and the significance. The idea of journalism is not to reveal the self, it's to actually hide the writer, hide the speaker.
So in order to tell a great story, you have to tell the truth. But to tell the truth sometimes can expose others or put them in an uncomfortable place if they were to read what you're writing or something and they didn't know maybe that you were writing it at the time.
Right.
How do you weigh the benefit of you personally getting satisfaction out of telling the truth, but potentially compromising somebody else that's involved in your story?
Right. That's a great question, and it's a question that a lot of people, autobiographical writers, ask. What I always say is that in the first draft, leave nothing out. Spare no one, including yourself. Be as ruthless and shameless and attacking and aggressive and whatever it is coming out of you in telling a story as you need to be. And then you can change it later. And then you can protect the innocent later. The other piece is that if you're coming from revenge, the work tends to be ugly. But even if you're talking about ugly experience, if you're coming from love, if it's something that you want to express somehow a redemptive love for those people or what happened, you can say very shocking, sometimes incriminating things, and people you think will be bothered by it aren't. And that blew me away, because I was very nervous with my first memoir that my family would freak out. And actually, my younger sister thanked me for telling the truth. And it wasn't nearly, for me, that was letting go of a lot of shame that I had. And we want to protect the antagonists in our own stories. And we want to protect bad behavior in our own stories. And that's I think writing is part of letting go of that.
It's really attractive to hear this kind of truth-telling that you talk about and like really getting to the bottom of it. But then there's the idea that truth is relative, Rashomon, right. Like, well, whose point of view is it? And truthfully, I've had experiences in my life where I thought something was true and had a very strong point of view on it, and then later found out through, triangulation, right, through other people, like maybe different versions of it. So where does, and half of us are just clueless all the time, most of us probably, I don't know, maybe 100%, where, are we living self-deception? So to say I'm putting the truth down or I'm trying to tell my story truthfully, how do you reconcile that? Like knowing, do you write knowing that some of it is, your fallacy of what your truth is?
Absolutely, yeah. The truth I'm talking about is emotional truth. I'm not talking about empirical truth. A memoirist writes the experience, their experience as they have felt it. So it's about releasing that truth. It's about expressing that, not about necessarily getting down the rational, black and white, linear truth forevermore. Do you understand? It's about the emotional truth. And emotional truth isn't rational, which is why writing is interesting. Because the things, when you look at how you feel on paper, you're sometimes shocked. Because it doesn't make sense to your mind. But it makes a lot of sense to your heart or your gut. It's the difference between suffering, holding on to something that hurts you, and being free. It's the impulse to be free of shame, of secrets, of quandaries and questions. It's really about, it's a release, it's a relief to let go of these things. It's not the vulnerability is exhilarating, because in the same way that when you're cracked open, that's an exhilarating moment. When you're in love for the first time and someone's looking at you and they can see you, it's terrifying, and you wouldn't want to be anywhere else in the world. And that's exactly what it's like to write when you're going for it, when you're really not, when you're really not playing it safe. It's a very enlivening experience. It's not hard labor. Writing is hard, and it takes forever. But the doing of it emotionally that you're talking is not hard labor. And if it is hard labor, it's because you're not telling the truth. It's because in some way you're evading the truth. And I see that with students, sometimes people with, who are writing their stories and they get stuck, and it's because there's some place they don't want to go. People have this idea that when fear comes up, you should avoid it. That's what we do, survival-wise, in our lives. In writing, it's just the opposite. When fear comes up, it means you're approaching something that wants to be released. But your ego is in rebellion. Your self-image is in rebellion. It's dangerous to go there. That's exactly when you should keep moving forward.
Could you please be the writer for two officials who are running for political office? For God's sake.
I'll pass. I'll let Jonathan Haidt do that. No, I'll pass. Thank you. Thanks. I hear you, though.
Did you find the difference between
Absolutely.
your emotional truth and whatever you put down on the paper?
Absolutely. And that's why you read what you've written and it takes you deeper. Usually questions lead to questions, and it goes deeper, which is what makes it so fascinating to do this kind of work. So it's a progressive, and you're never done. It's not like the story's ever finished. But it's the investigation piece that is so interesting. That's why writing is practice. I mean, that's why it really is practice.